All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling autism research.
Ooh, interesting.
But specifically, we're looking at, some critical perspectives on where all that research money is actually going.
Okay,
We've got a really fascinating article as our main source this time.
sounds good.
It's from the Aught Side. It's called Gut Feelings, Millions Spent on Pointless Autism Studies.
Catchy title.
It is, right.
Yeah.
And it was written by Dr. Jaime Hoerricks.
Oh, I've heard of him.
Yeah. They really don't hold back, challenging a lot of common assumptions about autism research.
That's important, though, isn't it? Sometimes you need someone to shake things up a bit.
Totally agree.
So what are some of the big ideas Horrocks is tackling in this article?
Well, one of the things they really go after is this deficit view of autism.
No, okay, yeah, I've heard that term before, but what does it actually mean in practice?
Well, Hoerricks argues that a lot of research, even with the best intentions, can accidentally reinforce this idea that there's like a right way for brains to work,
Ah, I see.
and that autism is somehow a deviation from that, a deficit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Even the language we use can be a problem.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Hoerricks points out how even terms like, neurotypical versus neurodivergent.
Right, very common terms.
Yeah, super common. Well, they sound clinical and neutral. They can subtly perpetuate this idea that one way of being is normal.
And the other isn't. Right. I hadn't really thought about it like that before.
It's sneaky, right?
Yeah.
And Hoerricks puts it really well. They say,
Was there a quote?
yeah, they say, this isn't just semantics. It's the same tired story dressed up in clinical terms, perpetuating the notion that one way of being is normal, whilst others are deviations to be scrutinized or fixed.
Wow, yeah, that's powerful.
Right. Makes you think.
It does.
And it's not just about, being politically correct or something.
Right.
It's about how this language can actually shape public perception and how we view autistic people.
And probably even how we design research studies, right?
Absolutely. If you start with the assumption that autism is something to be fixed, then your research is going to be focused on finding ways to fix it.
Rather than understanding it and supporting autistic people as they are.
Exactly. And this leads us to another big critique Hoerricks has.
Okay, what's that?
It's about the Autism Cares Act.
I'm not super familiar with that.
Okay, so basically it's this big piece of legislation in the U.S. that directs a ton of funding towards autism research.
Okay, so important for the field then.
Hugely. But Hoerricks argues that even though it was well-intentioned, the CARES Act ends up prioritizing research that's aimed at finding a cure for autism
Oh, interesting.
over providing more practical support that could make a real difference in the lives of autistic people right now.
So it's kind of like putting the cart before the horse, focusing on a hypothetical future solution instead of addressing current needs.
Exactly. And Hoerricks has this really, really strong line in the article.
I'll hear it.
They write, "This is the dominant neurotype waving its flag, declaring that it's willing to spend millions researching why we're different, but not a dime helping us survive in a society stacked against us."
Wow, that's a pretty strong statement.
It is, right. And it makes you think, what are we really trying to achieve with autism research?
Yeah, are we trying to understand it or erase it?
That's the big question Hoerricks is raising here.
It's an important one, for sure.
Mhm.
So where does this research money actually go? What are they spending millions on?
One of the big areas is research on the gut microbiome.
The what?
The gut microbiome. It's basically all the bacteria that live in our digestive system.
Oh, right. I think I've heard of that. What does that have to do with autism?
Well, there's this idea that the gut microbiome might somehow influence brain development, and that maybe some differences in the gut bacteria of autistic people could be related to some of the, the challenges they face.
Interesting. So by understanding the gut, we could potentially help people with autism.
That's the hope, but Hoerricks is pretty skeptical.
Why is that?
Well, for one thing, these studies are super expensive.
Oh,
Yeah, you have to sequence the DNA of millions of bacteria.
that sounds complicated.
It is. You need specialized equipment, complex bioinformatic analysis,
There's a lot of resources involved.
not to mention the cost of research staff and, lab space and institutional overheads.
It all adds up.
It really does.
And Horrocks is saying that maybe all that money could be used more effectively.
Right, instead of pouring millions into exploring these correlations between gut bacteria and autism, wouldn't it be more impactful to invest in things like creating sensory-friendly environments,
Oh, yeah.
or developing accessible educational resources, or job training programs that are tailored for neurodivergent individuals.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Addressing practical needs instead of chasing these long-shot possibilities.
Exactly. And that brings us to another area Hoerricks tackles, psychobiotics.
I have no idea what that is.
Okay, so psychobiotics are basically supplements or foods that aim to, alter the gut microbiome
Okay.
in ways that might improve mental health.
So they're kind of like probiotics, but for your brain.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But Hoerricks is quite skeptical.
Why?
Well, they say that the claims surrounding psychobiotics often go way beyond what the scientific evidence actually supports.
Oh, so it's like overhyped.
Yeah, there's a lot of hype, a lot of promises, but not a lot of solid evidence to back it up.
And I'm guessing that's a problem.
Oh, it can be a huge problem. Hoerricks actually uses this pretty strong analogy comparing it to, snake oil territory.
Ouch.
They argue that without, really robust, replicable evidence, these claims can be misleading and even harmful.
Yeah, I can see that, especially if people are spending money on these things, hoping for a miracle cure.
Exactly. And it plays into this whole cures narrative, which can be really damaging for autistic people.
Right, because it reinforces this idea that autism is something that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thinking Hoerricks is trying to challenge.
So they're saying we need a totally different approach to autism research.
They are. They're calling for a radical shift.
A radical shift? Okay, I'm intrigued. What would that look like?
Well, we'll dive into that after the break. So a radical shift in autism research, huh? That's a pretty big idea.
It is. It is.
So where do we even begin with something like that?
Well, Hoerricks suggests kind of starting with a different question,
Okay.
Like instead of asking, how do we change autistic people, we should be asking, how can we create a world that's more accommodating and inclusive of autistic people?
Ooh, that's good, yeah.
Bit of a mind flip, right?
Yeah, it's a totally different way of looking at it.
Instead of focusing on the individual as the problem, we're looking at the environment and the systems that are creating those barriers.
I like that.
Yeah, and that leads to a whole different set of research questions.
Give me an example.
Okay, so instead of searching for genetic markers for autism,
Right.
we could be studying the effectiveness of different educational approaches for autistic children.
That makes sense.
Or instead of trying to develop drugs that might suppress certain autistic traits,
Okay.
we could be researching how to design sensory-friendly spaces that reduce anxiety and overload.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean.
It's about support, not suppression.
Right. It is. And it's about recognizing that autistic people are not broken.
Right. They don't need to be fixed.
And Hoerricks actually points out this irony.
What's that?
That while millions are poured into researching why autistic brains are different, many autistic adults are struggling to find employment and live fulfilling lives.
It's a disconnect, isn't it?
It is. And there's this quote that really stood out to me where Hoerricks says,
Well, let's hear it.
"We'd rather search for the reasons you're different than help you succeed as you are."
Yeah, it's like society is so focused on the why of autism that they completely miss the how of supporting autistic individuals
To thrive.
to thrive. Exactly. So where does research come into that?
Well, Hoerricks argues that we need research that translates into tangible benefits for autistic people.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Like things that actually make a difference in their daily lives.
Okay, so what could that look like? What kind of research are we talking about?
Well, it could be things like, investing in job training programs
Right.
that are tailored for neurodivergent individuals.
Okay.
Or developing assistive technologies that enhance communication and social interaction. Or creating more inclusive and accessible healthcare systems.
So it's about going beyond just the theory
Yeah,
and actually putting these findings into practice.
Into practice, exactly.
And that probably requires a more collaborative approach, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Like researchers working closely with autistic individuals and their families and advocacy groups.
Yeah, to figure out what the most pressing needs are.
Exactly. And then actually develop solutions that are actually meaningful and make a difference.
So it's not just about changing the research questions.
Right.
It's also about changing who's doing the research and who's benefiting from it.
You got it. Traditionally, autism research has been dominated by non-autistic researchers.
Which makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way it's been for a long time, but it can lead to this disconnect, right?
Between the research priorities and the lived experiences of autistic people.
Exactly. So If we want research that truly empowers autistic individuals, we need to make sure that their voices are heard and their perspectives are actually represented in that whole research process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's about shifting the power dynamics a bit, right?
Yeah, it's about moving away from a model where research is done on autistic people and towards a model where research is done with and for autistic people.
That's a great way to put it, and it requires a fundamental change in how we think about expertise.
Okay.
We need to recognize that autistic people aren't just subjects to be studied, but they're holders of valuable knowledge and insights that can inform and enrich that whole research process.
It's about embracing the idea that lived experience is a form of expertise.
Yes.
And that autistic individuals are the ultimate experts on their own lives and their own experiences.
Absolutely. And by tapping into that expertise, we can create research that's more relevant, more impactful, and more likely to lead to positive change.
This is all sounding incredibly promising.
It is exciting, isn't it?
It is, but I gotta admit, I'm also feeling a bit overwhelmed. It just seems like such a huge task to shift this entire research landscape.
It's not easy, that's for sure, but it's definitely a challenge worth taking on. And it starts with small steps.
Like what?
Like supporting autistic-led research initiatives.
Okay.
Advocating for more inclusive hiring practices within research institutions, and demanding that research funding agencies prioritize community-engaged research projects.
So it's about changing the culture of research. One study at a time, one grant at a time.
One conversation at a time.
Yeah, one conversation at a time.
Exactly. And as more and more people embrace those principles of neurodiversity and recognize the value of autistic perspectives, we can create a research ecosystem that is truly empowering and transformative.
I love that.
Me too. It's a great vision.
Okay, so we've talked about this need for a more inclusive and empowering research agenda.
Right.
But Hoerricks also raises some important concerns about the potential dangers of certain research directions.
Yeah, this is where things get a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
It's crucial that we acknowledge these concerns.
Like what kinds of concerns?
Well, because while research can be this powerful tool for good, it can also be misused or misdirected in ways that can be, downright harmful.
And Hoerricks doesn't shy away from that.
Not at all. They bring up a pretty chilling thought.
Oh.
They ask, what if the end goal of all this research into things like the gut microbiome is to develop a supplement that essentially normalizes autistic individuals?
Oh, wow.
Making them more like their neurotypical peers.
That's kind of a scary thought.
It is a scary thought.
Yeah.
And it echoes a long and very troubling history of trying to eliminate difference rather than embrace it.
It's like, instead of celebrating the unique strengths and perspectives that autistic people bring to the table, we're trying to fit them into a box that they don't belong in.
Exactly. And Hoerricks even goes so far as to draw a parallel between this line of thinking and the horrific eugenics programs of the past.
Wow.
Where people with disabilities were deemed unfit and targeted for elimination.
Yeah, that's a heavy comparison.
It is, but it's a stark reminder of the ethical stakes involved in all of this. We have to be incredibly careful about the narratives we promote and the language we use, because even seemingly benign ideas can have some really unintended consequences.
So how do we make sure that research is used ethically and responsibly?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Especially in a field as complex and sensitive as autism?
It's a big question and one that needs ongoing dialogue and critical reflection.
Yeah.
But one crucial step is to involve autistic people in every stage of that research process.
Okay, yeah.
From the very beginning, like setting that research agenda, to interpreting those findings at the very end.
So it's not just about doing research on autistic people.
Right.
It's about doing research with them.
With them and for them.
And for them.
It's about partnership.
Yeah.
And ensuring that research is guided by the values of respect, autonomy, and self-determination, rather than the pursuit of cures or the normalization of difference.
It's about recognizing that autistic people are not just subjects to be studied.
Right.
But they are individuals with rights and perspectives and aspirations that need to be respected and valued.
And that, I think, is the heart of this whole shift that Hoerricks is talking about.
Yeah, it's about shifting the focus from change in autistic people to change in the world around them.
Exactly. Creating a society that's more just, more inclusive, and more accepting of neurodiversity in all its forms.
Now, that's a vision worth fighting for.
I think so, too.
This has been a fascinating deep dive so far.
It has.
We've gone from like some pretty sharp critiques of current research practices to this really hopeful vision of what the future could be.
It's a journey, isn't it?
It is.
And it's a reminder that research is never neutral.
That's a good point.
It reflects our values and our biases and our assumptions. And if we want research that truly serves the autistic community, we need to be intentional about shaping those values and challenging those assumptions.
Absolutely. So to our listeners,
Yes.
what stood out to you most in this deep dive? What sparked your curiosity? We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and advocating for research that reflects the needs and aspirations of the autistic community.
Remember, knowledge is powerful, but it's only truly transformative when it's coupled with empathy and respect and a commitment to making the world a better place.
I love that.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone. So we've talked a lot about the problems with autism research, the criticisms. But I want to kind of shift gears a bit now and talk about like the good stuff, the potential.
Yeah, there's got to be some, right?
There is. Like what are some areas where research could actually make a real positive difference
Look out.
in the lives of autistic people right now?
Oh, tons. So much potential.
Give me some examples.
Okay, well, imagine research that leads to better diagnostic tools.
Okay.
And not just to identify autism earlier, but to really understand each individual's like specific needs and strengths.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Right.
Yeah, because sometimes a diagnosis can feel like a label.
Yeah, it can be very limiting.
Yeah, but what if it came with like a roadmap or something?
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Like, here are the things that might be tough for you, but also here's where you shine.
Yeah.
And here are resources that are tailored just for you.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to stop there, right? This could extend throughout the lifespan.
Okay.
Like, we need research into support services that aren't just for children,
Right.
but that help autistic adults navigate things like finding a job that fits their skills, or managing sensory overload in the workplace.
Yeah.
Or even accessing healthcare that's sensitive to their communication style.
That's huge. And, it makes me think about how a lot of autistic adults report feeling isolated or misunderstood.
Yeah, that's a common theme, unfortunately.
It is. So could research help with that, like that social aspect?
I think so, absolutely. There's a lot of work that we can do in understanding how autistic people experience social interaction.
Okay.
And how we can create environments that are more inclusive and welcoming.
What would that look like in terms of research?
Well, it could be research into social skills training, but designed in a way that respects neurodiversity.
Okay.
Right? Not trying to force conformity.
Not trying to make them more normal.
Exactly. It's about giving them the tools to navigate a world that wasn't built with their needs in mind.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it goes beyond just individual support, too.
Okay.
What about research into, broader societal attitudes towards autism?
Yeah, how do we change the way people think about it?
Exactly. Think about the impact of media representation, for example. Yeah. Research could help us understand how autistic characters are portrayed in movies and TV and how that shapes public perception.
So instead of the stereotypical savant or the tragic figure.
Yeah, those are tired tropes.
Yeah, we could have more nuanced and realistic portrayals
that actually celebrate the diversity within the autistic community.
Yeah, I love that.
And research could also explore the impact of educational programs.
Okay.
Aimed at promoting neurodiversity awareness.
In schools and workplaces and
everywhere.
Yeah, in community.
It's about creating a culture of understanding.
Yeah, it's this ripple effect, right?
Exactly.
If we can change attitudes and increase understanding, that kind of paves the way for everything else, better support, more inclusive policies.
Right, and ultimately a world where autistic people can thrive as their authentic selves.
Yeah, that's what we want, right?
That's the dream.
That's the goal.
And I think that's the ultimate goal of empowering research. It's not just about studying autism.
Yeah.
It's about using that knowledge to create a more just and equitable world.
For everyone.
For everyone, exactly.
This has been such an incredible deep dive.
It has. It's been a journey.
It has been a journey.
Yeah.
We've talked about the criticisms, the hopes, the possibilities.
The challenges, the solutions.
I've seen a lot.
It has, but it's important, isn't it?
It is, and I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that research is never neutral.
That's such a key point.
Yeah, it reflects our values, our biases, our assumptions.
And if we want research that truly serves the autistic community, we need to be intentional about shaping those values and challenging those assumptions.
So to our listeners, we ask, what stood out to you the most in this deep dive? What sparked your curiosity, and what are you going to do about it? We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas.
Keep the conversation going.
Keep the conversation going and advocate for research that reflects the needs and aspirations of the autistic community.
Remember, knowledge is powerful.
It is.
But it's only truly transformative when it's coupled with empathy and respect.
And action.
And action, yes.
Yeah.
A commitment to actually making the world a better place.
That's what it's all about.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
And keep thinking critically out there.